Hey guys, it's me, Rich. You just watched the internet melt down over two words: nationalize elections. In this video, we're going to go over what actually happened in Fulton County, why federal agents seized hundreds of ballot boxes, and why Democrats instantly went into full panic mode. Everyone is screaming about democracy collapsing. However, what we're soon going to see is that the headline skipped the most important part of the story. The reality is messier, more political, and far more revealing than the outrage campaigns suggest. You'll see the clips, the reactions, and the context the media refuses to connect. By the end, you can decide what this mess really means. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to RPW Media. Something unusual happened in Fulton County, Georgia. Federal agents showed up with court-authorized warrants and walked out with hundreds of boxes of ballots and election records from the 2020 election. The story barely had time to breathe before the word raid exploded across the headlines. And yet, the most important question hung in the air unanswered. Why would a judge sign off on that warrant in the first place? Because judges do not approve federal search warrants based on vibes. They require probable cause. That matters a lot. So DOJ took the evidence they had to a judge. The judge read it and said, holy mackerel, there really is some probable cause here, and signed for the warrant. Okay, so on January 28, federal government carried out a court-authorized search warrant at the Fulton County Election Hub and Operations Center. During that operation, agents seized hundreds of boxes of ballots and election records from the 2020 election. People say there was about 700 boxes in total. Now, pause right there. Imagine the reaction if the political roles were reversed. The internet would still be on fire a week later. Guys, if you like our videos and you haven't already, you should become a subscriber to the channel. You can hit that notification bell and smack the like button because it helps us get our message out to more people. Okay. So instead, we immediately got a coordinated meltdown. The media called it a raid. Every one of them. It was a raid. Democrats called it authoritarian. Social media called it the end of democracy. And the timing was perfect because just days later, Donald Trump said something that lit the fuse. On February 2nd, during an interview on Dan Bongino's podcast, Trump said Republicans should take over the voting in some states and that they should nationalize the voting. Later, speaking to reporters, he doubled down with another remark. If a state cannot run an election honestly, he said, somebody should do something about it, and the federal government should get involved. The phrase nationalize elections became trending within hours. Commentators warned of democracy collapsing. Politicians issued statements. Social media entered a full meltdown mode. But what did he really mean? That's the part that most headlines skipped. Okay, according to Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, he was talking about federal election standards, not federal control over polling places, which is what the Democrats want you to think because they want to cover up their alleged cheating in 2020. Now, I say alleged because it's legal that I have to say it.
Do it honestly and can't be done properly and timely, then something else has to happen. What did he mean by that? Is he suggesting that the federal government count votes in elections?
What the president is suggesting, and I just spoke to him about this, is that Republicans and Democrats in Congress should pass the Save America Act. This piece of legislation is going to ensure that states are abiding by federal election law by removing non-citizens from their voter rolls. In addition, the Save America Act will require voter ID to vote, and it will require proof of citizenship to register to vote. These are very common sense policies and proposals that 89% of our country agree with. So that's what the president is talking about. Again, I just spoke with him about this, and he's calling on both Republicans and Democrats to send the Save America Act, to pass it into law and to send it to his desk as quickly as possible.
To be clear, the SAVE Act doesn't say anything about who counts votes, which has always been a state, a local, a county function. Why does he keep talking about somebody else, presumably the federal government, counting votes?
Because the SAVE Act directs states to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. And we know in states across the country, the president is right to point this out. In states like California or in places like New York City, non-citizens are allowed to vote in state and local elections. And the federal government should absolutely do away with that. I don't think a single person in this room, if you really are being honest with yourselves, should agree that non-citizens should vote in American elections, no matter where that election is up and down the ticket. And so this is a piece of federal legislation that will help states ensure the integrity and the sanctity of their elections, and that's what the president wants.
All right. Not Washington running your local precinct. They pointed specifically to national voter ID requirements and proof of citizenship laws like the SAVE Act. Okay, here's the uncomfortable truth that no one wants to say out loud. Congress already has authority to regulate federal elections. Now people go, but Rich, you always point to Article 1, Section 4 that says that state legislatures, that they have the authority to do election laws and no one else. Well, never said no one else, because there's a part that exists that allows us to do at the federal level, like campaign finance laws, voting rights laws. How about the Voting Rights Act? Accessibility requirements exist. Federal election dates exist, right? We're not talking about state elections. We're talking about federal elections. So the idea of national standards is not new. It already exists. The debate is about how far those standards should go. Now, Trump's argument is very simple. If federal elections decide who runs the federal government, then federal standards should ensure those elections are secure and uniform. You can agree or disagree. That is a policy debate, but it's very different from the image of Washington running local voting booths, because that's BS. Now, let's talk about the reaction. Okay, so Democrats like Sarah Draper are telling you a story, but not the story. On February 4th, Draper gave a speech with a number of Democrats surrounding her. Draper is a state representative in Georgia who is an attorney, but she claims sometimes to have been an election attorney, though I've never seen or found anything of her doing any elections work. Now, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen anything to that effect, but whatever. Give it a watch.
1 week ago today, the FBI and the Trump DOJ carried out a raid in Fulton County.
There was no raid. Unlike at Mar-a-Lago that the Democrats threw at Donald Trump, there were no guns ablaze coming in, agents pointing weapons with orders shoot to kill. They just issued a search warrant and took what was in the search warrant. That was signed by a judge because he looked at the evidence and said, yeah, there's a lot of probable cause there.
Elections hub. They took nearly 700 boxes of documents containing sensitive voter information.
You mean the same information that every government already has about all of us?
And all the original ballots from the 2020 election.
So if they're looking for original ballots of the 2020 election in the search warrant, they're going to take the original ballots of 2020 election from the search warrant.
This is a blatant attempt by our federal government, not just to interfere with Georgia's elections.
They're not interfering with Georgia's elections. Georgia interfered in a federal election, is what they're trying to prove.
But to take them over.
They're not taking anything over. No one is going to have a federal agent going at the polling places and running the polling place. That's not what this is about at all. They're lying.
When President Trump is talking about nationalizing elections, he is talking about Georgia.
Wrong. He's talking about everywhere in America. And he's not talking about nationalizing elections, though he said the words. What he meant was for federal elections, when you see that there's illegitimacy going on, if the federal government has an election on who's going to run the federal government, the states should not have that power. Which is why Article 1, Section 4, I talk about all the time, and the Constitution says that state legislatures are granted the power to do election law, okay? But they always miss this little part when they want to talk about this on the left. It says, but Congress can override these rules except for the places of choosing senators. And we've already done that, guys. I mean, just ask them, do you want to get rid of the Voting Rights Act? Do you want to get rid of the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, that I say Democrats have allegedly used for decades to cheat? Do you want that?
Let me be clear about something.
Whenever you hear a Democrat say, let me be clear about something, let me be clear, you know they're lying.
This is not normal.
It's very normal. We have all kinds of federal laws on the federal election.
We are living in unprecedented times.
Unprecedented time. So the Voting Rights Act wasn't an unprecedented time? She's a bonehead.
And the continuation of the great experiment that is our democracy.
We don't have a democracy. Good Lord. She claims to be an attorney. We have a constitutional republic. The founders were terrified of democracy because it's brutal.
Is at stake.
No, if you want to say democracy is at stake, it was when you guys stole the 2020 election, which it's looking more and more like you allegedly did.
The worst thing that we can do as a society, as a state, and as leaders under this gold dome is to underestimate the threat.
Yeah, we underestimated it for a lot of years, and look what it got us. You guys stole an election.
My name is Syra Draper, and I am the Chief Deputy Whip of the Georgia House Democrats. My colleagues and I are here this morning to sound the alarm, but we're also here to connect the dots. The decisions about Georgia coming out of Washington are not divorced from the decisions being made in Georgia by Georgians.
Yes, but you don't have the right to make rules that would allow you to cheat in a federal election. Do whatever you want in the state. The state will handle that. But for federal elections, you do not have that right.
Silence is complicity. And
yeah, you guys were silent for 4 whole years about you guys stealing the 2020 election.
There are actors here who are not just encouraging the takeover of our elections.
Nobody is encouraging the takeover of Georgia's elections. You're a liar, Syra.
But are facilitating them too.
Wrong.
The public deserves to know who is actually fighting.
The public deserves to know who actually cheated.
For fair and free election.
You don't care about fair and free elections, which is why this whole thing is going on. All right, guys, the messaging was immediate and unified among Democrats. Accountability now equals authoritarianism. Investigation equals dictatorship. Questions equal conspiracy. Now, aren't the Democrats the ones who always throw out that mantra that no one is above the law? They said it about Donald Trump 1,000 times. Well, Democrats are not above the law either, especially when it comes to stealing elections. Here's Syra Draper again, whining once more. Give it a watch.
Hi, this is Georgia State Representative Syra Draper. It was just last week that the Trump administration, the Trump DOJ, and the FBI held a raid at the Fulton County Elections Office.
There was no raid. Unlike with Mar-a-Lago, no federal agents came in with guns blazing. No, nothing like that. They served a search warrant and politely took out 700 boxes.
Of course, Fulton County is the county that houses Atlanta. And look, I think one of the worst things that we can do in this moment is underestimate the significance of it.
Yes, we shouldn't underestimate. You're right. We shouldn't underestimate the significance of it, because the significance is we have to have free and fair elections, especially at the federal level. Look what happened with 4 years of warm diarrhea brains, Joe Biden.
Just today, this article. Look, Trump's saying the silent part
Yeah, it's Politico.
out loud. He wants to nationalize our elections. He wants to take control out of the states, and he wants to bring it to the federal government.
Nonsense. The fact of the matter is, like I said, Article 1, Section 4 says that states get to make election laws, but it also says what this woman who claims to be an attorney seems to forget is that it says that the Congress can change rules. We've already done it. The National Voter Registration Act, the Voting Rights Act. We've already done it. It's already been done. And yet she's claiming that Trump wants to take all the authority away from the states. He doesn't care about state election laws. He cares about federal elections, and he should.
There's so many issues with that. It brings security concerns, confidence in elections concerns, the fact that we have these.
The fact of the matter is we lost confidence in elections when you guys stole the 2020 election.
Decentralized elections actually makes our elections more safe and more secure. But, you know, there are a lot of folks here in Georgia that are on the other side of the aisle, my friends on the other side of the aisle, that don't seem to have a problem with that. And that's not how this should be. Just imagine how you would feel if this was the Biden administration saying that they wanted to take over our election.
Well, they were part of the people who stole the 2020 election. We had 4 horrific years due to that. Okay, so for those of you out there who think that the federal government under Trump's direction is only going after Democrats, no, Trump wants to bring accountability to anyone, including Republicans who are involved in stealing elections. And here's a guy who goes on X by the name of CanCon, CANNCON. Follow this guy. He writes, whoa, it's time to seriously ask, is Brian Kemp handing out judge nominations to people who are complicit in ignoring or subverting 2020 election cases and claims? Now, Brian Kemp is the Republican governor of Georgia. He was the Secretary of State prior to that. So he goes on saying, I was just informed that it's no longer 3 people who thwarted election investigations that subsequently received lucrative judicial appointments, but 4. This one on the Georgia Supreme Court. So what he's alleging is he's saying that people that were in positions where they could help throw away and throw out elections at the state level, that they were given judicial appointments as a payback for that. Now we have one who's on the Georgia Supreme Court, and he writes, at least this one was a judge before the other 3 were not judges, and one of them wasn't even a practicing lawyer. So in July 2021, Governor Kemp nominated Judge Andrew Pinson to the Supreme Court after just 1 year on the Georgia Court of Appeals. He writes, golly, that's fast, just 1 year. No one else at the appellate level was more qualified than the FNG. Well, know what that means. So before the state SCOTUS nomination, Judge Pinson had months earlier upheld the lower court's dismissal of voter GA's ballot review case for lack of standing. See, the libnuts always like to say, well, there were 60 cases. Actually, there were about 54. When they say 60, they're talking about cases that weren't even involved with Trump. Trump wasn't involved in them, his legal team, right? But they always say, oh, they were all thrown out for lack of evidence. No, absolutely no. Not a single judge in those 54 cases even wanted to look at the evidence. They just said no standing. Now, if you get 54 judges across the country who say, nah, I see your evidence, but I don't even want to read it. Don't even care. There was never a case to be thrown out. They just said lack of standing. I mean, think about that, guys. That's important. So this guy says that it must be pretty epic when the freshman Supreme Court justice, this Pinson guy, had to recuse himself from the appeal to the highest court only to watch his colleagues overturn his appellate ruling. Yikes. Now, I have always maintained that in 2020, as far as the election goes, that the judges were all in on it. You can't say no standing when it's Trump's lawyers and Trump was the actual president of the United States running for re-election. You can't say no standing. He had standing. Okay, so here's another one. On January 21st of this year, the following video was posted on X showing where Fulton County Commissioner Dana Barrett, who was actually running for Georgia's Secretary of State. Now, that's the office that's duty-bound to oversee fair elections. She panics and flees after a very simple question is asked. Give this a watch.
Registered to vote there. We went around Fulton County the last few weeks and we see that people are currently registered to vote in places like empty lots, homeless shelters that closed 10 years ago. What would you do if you become Secretary of State to address that?
I'm not going to reply to conspiracy theories.
It's not conspiracy. It's a current. You can currently go on the voter rolls, purchase them for $45, and go there with us. We will gladly take you if you want to go to. I appreciate
what you're saying. I'm not going to respond to.
See, she doesn't have a response to it.
How is that a conspiracy theory? It's an act of voter rolls. If
And
you're going to
she
be running
walks
for
away.
Secretary of State, you're in charge of maintaining the voter rolls. Don't you care about if people are registered to vote from empty
Thank you for your
lots?
questions. I appreciate it. I've got to.
Do you think it's a conspiracy theory that people are registered to vote from empty lots, though? Well, I have the ability to go wherever I want to. People are currently registered to vote in empty lots, Commissioner, and if you're going to run for Secretary of State, aren't you?
Now, I happen to know that in Georgia, there were thousands of people who registered to vote using a post office box, right? That's illegal in Georgia, but they voted. He said people voted, and when they got to where the address was, there was nothing there. It was an empty lot. How many do you think? 50,000, 100,000? Just gave the address of an empty lot, and she just walked away. Now, here's the part that almost feels surreal. She had the easiest political answer imaginable to the guy's question. The guy said, well, look, yeah, people registered to vote at empty lots and you know, wherever he said. And he said, well, what would you do about that? All right. She could have promised reforms. She could have called for transparency. She could have blamed the current Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, because it happened under his watch. Instead, she ran away from the question, which raises the question no one in the media seems eager to ask. Why does basic accountability trigger panic with these people? Because accountability changes the narrative, and narratives are power. All right, so the entire story comes down to one simple idea. Federal agents do not seize hundreds of ballot boxes for fun. They've got better things to do than that. Judges do not sign warrants casually, especially when Donald Trump is involved. National election standards are not a new invention. But the outrage machine needed a villain, and they found one. The bigger story here is not just the investigation or the headlines. It is the reaction from Democrats, the speed, the panic, the refusal to even discuss the possibility of reform because they believe that they will look bad if they start talking about reforms. And then people go, well, why didn't you do that before? That tells you everything you need to know. And the upside is simple. Debate is happening again. Questions are being asked again. Transparency is back in the conversation again. And you have to hand it to the heroes out there who are acting as independent journalists because they are asking the questions that the fake news refuses to when it comes to Democrats. And they're not backing down. They're following up with their questions. All right, so tell me what you think in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
So scared to admit I was wrong. I'll blame anything else, anyone but myself.